by the end of the first year, I was probably working in, I would say, 6 or 8 offices.
By the time frame of 2014, when Professor Markel was murdered, how many offices were you working in, approximately?
Between 30 and 35 offices I would come in to.
When you graduated, where did you live?
When I graduated Perio, I lived in an apartment across the street from school, and then I bought my house I still lived in 16 years or 20 years later after that.
And that house is where?
On Whale Harbor. I moved in there in 2006.
Now, during this time frame of 2014, can you describe for the jury how far you would travel? In other words, how far were the offices apart from one another?
I never turned any work down, so I had an office as far south as Cutler Ridge, which is a little bit north of Homestead. It's a good hour and a half south of Fort Lauderdale. And then my furthest office I went to north was in East Port St. Lucie, which is a good hour and 45 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale.
Port St. Lucie is probably about halfway between Miami and Orlando. Is that fair to say, or closer to Orlando?
I'd say it's probably closer to Orlando.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, your typical work week, what did it look like?
I would work in usually 2 offices a day. I would start around 8 or 9 o'clock, work in one office till about 1 o'clock, and then I'd go to another office and I'd piggyback it. I'd try to be in another office that was in the same vicinity as the first office, and I'd just usually start there around 1:30. I'd have it where it's only a 5 or 10 minute drive to the second office. I would tell them I could stay as late as you need, and then when people had emergencies, which when you work in 30 offices, there's always someone that has an issue, I would come into their office. I would just say, just have an assistant stay, and when I got done with that second office, if it was 8 o'clock, 8:30, I would still go in and I'd work in the third office. So it was almost 2 offices on most days, and I would say 20% and 30% of the time there was a third office.
How many days a week did you work? And again, we're talking about the 2014 time frame.
I was working 6 days a week, and then I was still working 6 days a week.
Now,
sometimes every once in a while there'd be a big case, and my whole week was booked up, and the patient needed something, and it was hours, and I didn't have time, so an office would open up on Sunday, and I would go in on Sunday and do the work.
For the most part, in your job working in these offices, what form of payment were you paid mostly in? Was it cash or some other form of payment?
The offices would always pay me an office check.
Now, were you ever paid in cash from these offices?
I wasn't paid from the offices that I worked for in cash, but if I was doing a work on like one of the assistants in the office or a friend of the dentist, and the dentist didn't want any money to come to him, and I was doing it as a favor, I would say just go ahead and pay me in cash for the materials. And then the materials were expensive. Sometimes they were hundreds, sometimes it was $1,000. And then but the dentist didn't want to take any of the money from that person. So he was like, I'm removing myself from the situation. So the person would pay me the cash just for the materials for the work that I did on them. And that was really just when I was doing favors, and it was sporadic. Sometimes more than other, depends on the month.
By the way, backtracking a little bit, growing up, what profession was your dad in?
My dad was a general dentist.
And did your mom work growing up when you grew up?
She had 3 kids, and she still worked as a substitute teacher, where she would come in sporadically, but she wasn't working full time after she had the 3 of us.
Did there come a time where she worked in your dad's dental practice?
Yeah, I would say probably after the kids went to college, or maybe probably towards the end of high school or college, my mom came in and was doing front desk work and helping my dad out.
And what other roles did she have in the office?
She did the bookkeeping. She helped me with all my financial stuff as far as like paying insurances, making stuff with anything that was due at a certain time, licenses. She paid salaries at the office, and then also did front desk with Erica.
All right. Let's talk about the Adelson Institute. When you became this traveling periodontist, were one of the places that you traveled to your dad's dental practice?
Yes.
How often did you work at the Adelson Institute?
I would work at my dad's office, I would say every 4 to 6 weeks. And I would piggyback it. There was another office that I worked at every 2 weeks that was in the same plaza as my dad's. So I would finish there usually about 4 o'clock, and then I'd go into my office, and then I'd start working there by 4:15, and I'd stay as late as I needed to. 10, 11 o'clock.
Do you remember what the full name of the practice was called?
Well, originally, or when we changed it to...
Well, let's start with what you changed it to.
Okay. Well, when I graduated my residency in periodontics, I thought, since I was joining my dad's practice and it was now going to have a periodontist there, I thought we'd rename the practice and give it a fancy name. So we called it we copyrighted the Adelson Institute for Implants and Aesthetic Dentistry.
Okay. Now, growing up, did it have that name?
No.
It was just a plain old dental practice, right?
Yeah, it was just my dad and his 3 employees.
How many people worked at the Adelson Institute?
There was Erica Johnson, Clarissa. Erica was the front desk. Clarissa was my dad's assistant since 1979 until he retired 2 years ago. And then Amy was the hygienist. And then my mom when she would be there.
And your mom controlled the checkbook?
Yeah, she handled that stuff.
Who did all the billing for the practice?
My mom and Erica did the billing.
How many dentists were in the practice?
Just one dentist, just my dad.
Did there come a time when you bought the practice from your dad?
Yeah, my dad was going to sell the practice, and I thought it would be a good idea for me to buy it, and I thought maybe I'd run it and it would be something that I would always have. I didn't like the idea of it being sold, so I bought it from my dad when he wanted to slow down in 2012.
During the time period of 2014, who owned the practice?
In 2014, I was the owner of the practice.
Okay. Now, during the time frame of the wires in 2016, who owned the practice?
I had sold it back to my dad in 2015.
Why did you sell it back to your dad?
Because I didn't have any time to run it. And even though I bought it, nothing had changed. My dad was still the same dentist that was there. My mom was still the same person doing the books. And they were spending all their time running it. And I was so busy with my traveling periodontics, I didn't have time to dedicate to it. And it really wasn't financially, it wasn't feasible. And there wasn't a benefit.
I want to talk about cash a little bit. Do you like to collect cash?
I always have, yes.
Why?
I like it probably goes back to when I was a kid. I get $1 a week allowance, and I would save it up, and I just like the feeling of looking at it. I'd rather look at it than put it in the bank. So whenever I had cash, I always saved it up.
Now, were there several ways that you accumulated cash?
Yes, there was.
Did you have a real estate business or some real estate in 2014?
In 2014, yes.
Okay. And would you accumulate cash through this business?
There was some cash that came in through that, yes.
Did you rent out dock